Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
Have you ever experienced a connection so powerful that it felt almost impossible to explain? A connection that appeared suddenly, changed you deeply, and then, just as unexpectedly, disappeared. One day, everything felt aligned. Conversations flowed effortlessly. Time seemed to slow down when you were together. It felt as if the universe itself had quietly orchestrated your meeting. You might have even wondered, how is it possible to feel this close to someone so quickly? And then, somehow, everything fell apart. Maybe the separation happened through conflict. Maybe life circumstances pulled you in different directions. Maybe fear, timing, or emotional wounds created distance neither of you truly wanted. But the result was the same. Silence. Distance. And a question that refuses to leave your mind. Why would the universe bring two people together so intensely only to tear them apart? For many people, separation feels like the end of the story. It feels like proof that the connection was an illusion, a misunderstanding, or simply bad timing. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the separation wasn't meant to destroy the connection, but to transform it? What if the distance was never the end of the journey, but the beginning of a much deeper one? This idea may sound mysterious at first. Yet throughout countless spiritual traditions, personal stories, and life experiences, a strange pattern appears again and again. Some of the deepest connections in life do not follow a straight path. They break. They pause. They disappear for a while. And then, sometimes they return in ways no one could have predicted. Why does this happen? Because the universe often works in ways that are far more complex than our human expectations. When two people meet at a powerful moment in their lives, it doesn't always mean both of them are ready for the connection to fully unfold. Sometimes the meeting happens first, but the growth required to sustain that bond comes later. And that is where separation begins to play its role. Think of it this way. Imagine two seeds planted in the same soil. At first, both seeds are full of potential. But if they try to grow too close together before they have developed strong roots, they can end up competing for the same nutrients, the same space, the same sunlight. If they continue growing this way, both plants may weaken. But if time and space allow them to grow independently, developing their own strength, stability, and resilience, something remarkable can happen later. When they finally grow tall enough, their branches can meet again, this time without suffocating each other. In many ways, certain relationships follow a similar pattern. At the beginning, the connection awakens something powerful inside both people. Emotions run deep. Old patterns rise to the surface. Hidden fears suddenly appear. Insecurities that were buried for years begin to reveal themselves. This intensity can be overwhelming. Sometimes one person pulls away. Sometimes both people do. And suddenly, the connection that once felt magical turns into confusion. You might ask yourself endless questions. Did I imagine the connection? Why did they leave if what we had felt so real? Why can't I forget them, even after so much time? These questions can haunt someone for months, sometimes even years. Yet what many people do not realize is that separation often begins a hidden process that neither person can see at first. The universe rarely reveals the entire plan at once. Instead, it allows each person to walk their own path for a while. During this time, something subtle begins to shift. Life experiences start shaping both individuals in unexpected ways. Challenges appear that force emotional growth. New perspectives emerge. Old wounds slowly begin to heal. And sometimes, the very things that once pushed two people apart slowly dissolve. Consider the story of Daniel and Sophia. When they first met, their connection felt electric. Conversations lasted for hours. They shared the same dreams, the same curiosity about life, the same strange sense that they had known each other long before they met. But there was one problem. Neither of them was emotionally ready. Daniel had just ended a painful relationship and carried deep trust issues. Sophia, on the other hand, had spent years building emotional walls to protect herself from disappointment. At first, the connection felt exciting. But as deeper emotions began to surface, both of their fears quietly followed. Small misunderstandings started to grow. One moment of silence felt like rejection. One emotional reaction felt like betrayal. What began as a beautiful connection slowly turned into tension neither of them understood. Eventually, they separated. For a long time, both believed that the story had simply ended. Daniel moved to another city for work. Sophia focused on her career and tried to move forward with her life. Yet something strange happened during the years that followed. Both of them began changing. Daniel started therapy, slowly learning how his past had shaped his fear of intimacy. Sophia began exploring personal growth and realized how much her emotional defenses had prevented her from fully trusting others. Without realizing it, both of them were slowly becoming the versions of themselves that could handle the connection they once shared. Years later, an unexpected coincidence brought them back into the same place. Neither had planned it. Neither had searched for it. Yet when they saw each other again, something felt different. The same connection was there, but this time it felt calmer, deeper, and far more grounded. The universe had not destroyed their connection. It had simply paused it. And this pattern is far more common than most people realize. Sometimes separation is not a sign that the bond was meaningless. Sometimes it is the universe creating space for transformation. Because when two people meet too early in their journey, the connection can expose wounds they are not yet ready to face. Distance gives both souls the opportunity to grow independently, to heal, to evolve, and to become the people they were meant to be. This is why many spiritual teachers say something fascinating. The universe doesn't always separate people to end their story. Sometimes it separates them to rewrite it. But here is where things become even more mysterious. Because when the universe begins preparing two people for reunion, certain signs start appearing. Subtle signals, strange coincidences, moments that feel almost too perfectly timed to be random. Have you ever noticed repeating numbers showing up everywhere during an emotional period in your life? Or heard a song that suddenly reminded you of someone you hadn't thought about in years? Or felt an unexpected sense of calm about a connection that once caused deep pain? These moments may seem small at first, but for many people, they are the beginning of something much bigger. Because when the universe is quietly guiding two paths back toward each other, it rarely stays completely silent. In fact, the signs often begin long before the reunion ever happens. And once you learn to recognize them, you may start seeing the story of separation in a completely different light.
So what are these signs?
And how does the universe actually begin guiding two people back together after time, distance, and growth have changed everything? That's exactly what we're about to explore. When a powerful connection suddenly breaks apart, the first reaction most people have is simple and painful. Something must have gone wrong. Maybe someone made a mistake. Maybe one person didn't love enough. Maybe timing was simply unfair. But when we look deeper into the patterns of life and the stories of countless people who have experienced intense soul-level connections, we begin to notice something surprising. Separation often isn't caused by the absence of love. In fact, sometimes it happens because the connection is too powerful for where both people are in their lives at that moment. This may sound paradoxical, but it is a pattern that appears again and again. When two people share a connection that touches something deep within their identity, emotions begin to surface that were hidden for years. Old fears, childhood wounds, unresolved pain, limiting beliefs about love, trust, and vulnerability. The connection acts almost like a mirror. And sometimes, that mirror shows us parts of ourselves we are not ready to face. Have you ever noticed how certain people trigger emotions in you far more intensely than others? You might meet dozens of people throughout your life, but only a few will have the strange ability to make you feel completely seen and completely exposed at the same time. This happens because some connections operate on a deeper psychological and emotional level. Instead of staying on the surface, they awaken the hidden layers of the human experience. At first, this awakening can feel magical. Conversations feel meaningful. The emotional connection feels immediate. There's a sense of familiarity that is difficult to explain logically. People often describe it as feeling like they've known the other person for years, even when they've only just met. But as the relationship continues, the deeper layers begin to emerge. For example, imagine someone who has always struggled with abandonment fears. When they enter a powerful emotional connection, every small distance suddenly feels threatening. A delayed message may trigger anxiety. A quiet moment may feel like rejection. At the same time, the other person might have a completely different wound, perhaps a fear of losing independence or being emotionally overwhelmed. As the connection deepens, these two fears begin to collide. One person may seek reassurance. The other may seek space. Neither of them is wrong. Both are simply reacting from the emotional patterns they developed long before the relationship began. And without realizing it, the connection begins to activate the very wounds both people need to heal. This is one of the most important reasons why separation occurs in deep soul connections. The relationship becomes too intense for the current emotional capacity of the individuals involved. Instead of creating peace, it begins to create pressure. Instead of bringing clarity, it begins to reveal unresolved pain. And when this happens, the mind naturally looks for a way to escape the discomfort. Sometimes that escape comes in the form of conflict. Sometimes it comes through misunderstandings. Sometimes it appears as sudden distance that neither person fully understands. But beneath the surface, something far more meaningful is happening. The connection is revealing the work that still needs to be done within each person. Consider the story of Elena and Marcus. When they first met, their connection felt effortless. They spent hours talking about their dreams, their fears, and the deeper questions about life that most people avoid. For the first time, both of them felt truly understood. But as their bond grew stronger, so did the emotional intensity. Marcus had spent most of his life avoiding vulnerability. Growing up, he had learned to rely only on himself. Emotional closeness felt unfamiliar and therefore uncomfortable. Elena, on the other hand, longed for emotional depth and security. She valued openness, communication, and reassurance. At first, these differences didn't seem significant. But as the relationship deepened, they became more visible. When Elena tried to discuss feelings, Marcus often withdrew. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't yet know how to handle the emotional intensity. Elena interpreted his distance as rejection. Marcus interpreted her emotional needs as pressure. Neither of them intended to hurt the other. Yet slowly, misunderstandings accumulated. Eventually, the emotional tension reached a point where the relationship could no longer sustain itself. They separated. At the time, it felt like failure. Both walked away believing the connection had simply been too complicated. But something interesting happened during the years that followed. Marcus began to realize that his fear of vulnerability had shaped many of his relationships. He started working on emotional awareness, learning how to express feelings he had suppressed for most of his life. Elena, meanwhile, discovered that her need for reassurance had deeper roots in past experiences of abandonment. Through personal growth and reflection, she began developing a stronger sense of inner security. Both were growing but separately. And this illustrates one of the most important truths about separation in deep connections. Sometimes the relationship cannot continue, not because it lacks love, but because it requires growth that cannot happen while both people remain together. Distance creates space. Space creates perspective. Perspective allows transformation. When two people remain constantly within the emotional intensity of a relationship, they may struggle to see their own patterns clearly. But when separation occurs, something shifts. Silence replaces constant interaction. Reflection replaces emotional reaction. And gradually, individuals begin to see themselves more honestly. Many people who go through this process report a strange realization months or years later. They begin to recognize that the separation forced them to grow in ways they might never have chosen voluntarily. Without the distance, they might never have faced certain fears. Without the heartbreak, they might never have questioned old beliefs about love and identity. Without the silence, they might never have listened to their own inner voice. This is why some spiritual perspectives view separation not as punishment, but as preparation. a period of transformation that allows each person to evolve into someone capable of sustaining a deeper connection. Of course, this doesn't mean every separation leads to reunion. Life does not guarantee that every story will circle back. But what it does reveal is that powerful connections often trigger powerful growth. And growth rarely happens without discomfort. In fact, some of the most meaningful personal transformations occur precisely because a relationship challenged us in ways nothing else could. The connection becomes a catalyst. It pushes us to confront aspects of ourselves we had avoided for years. It invites us to become more emotionally aware, more authentic, more resilient. And even when two people walk separate paths for a long time, the lessons of that connection often remain with them. In some cases, those lessons eventually prepare both individuals for a completely different version of the relationship. A version built not on emotional reactions, but on emotional maturity. A connection that once felt overwhelming may later feel balanced. What once triggered fear may later inspire trust. But before that kind of reunion becomes possible, something else must happen first. The universe begins quietly guiding both people through experiences that shape their growth. New opportunities appear. Unexpected challenges arise. Life begins rearranging circumstances in subtle ways. And slowly, without anyone fully realizing it, the paths of two individuals begin evolving toward a new alignment. But how does this process actually unfold? What kind of invisible work begins during the separation phase? And how does the universe begin aligning the pieces that might eventually bring two people back together? That hidden transformation is exactly what we will explore next. When a deep connection ends, most people focus only on what they can see. The silence, the distance, the absence of the person who once played such a powerful role in their life. From the outside, it can feel as though the story has simply stopped. Two people who once shared something meaningful are now walking in completely different directions. But what if the most important part of the story is happening during the time when nothing seems to be happening at all? Because when separation occurs in powerful soul connections, something subtle begins to unfold beneath the surface of everyday life. It is quiet. It is gradual. And most of the time, neither person realizes it is happening. Yet this invisible process often becomes the foundation for everything that follows. To understand this, imagine a moment in life when everything around you appears still. A field in the middle of winter, for example. The trees are bare, the ground seems lifeless, and the landscape feels frozen in time. But beneath the soil, something remarkable is taking place. Seeds are preparing for the next season. Roots are slowly spreading deeper into the earth. Energy is gathering for the moment when growth becomes visible again. From the outside, winter looks like an ending. But in reality, it is preparation. Separation in deep connections often works in a similar way. The emotional intensity that once dominated the relationship fades into silence, creating space for something that rarely happens when two people remain constantly connected: individual transformation. During the relationship, emotions often move quickly. Reactions happen instantly. Words are exchanged in the heat of the moment. Patterns repeat themselves without much time for reflection. But once distance appears, everything slows down. Without the constant presence of the other person, each individual is left alone with their thoughts, their memories, and their feelings. At first, this can be uncomfortable. Questions start surfacing. What really happened between us? Why did certain moments trigger such strong reactions? Was I protecting myself or pushing someone away? These questions often appear slowly, sometimes months after the separation. But they mark the beginning of something important: self-awareness. And self-awareness is one of the most powerful forms of transformation that can occur after a deep emotional connection. Many people initially try to distract themselves from the pain of separation. They focus on work, social life, new routines, or even new relationships. Yet over time, the lessons of the connection begin to return. A memory appears unexpectedly. A conversation with someone else reminds them of something they once experienced. A situation in a new relationship suddenly reveals a pattern they hadn't noticed before. Gradually, the mind begins to connect the dots. And something interesting begins to happen. Instead of seeing the past connection as a source of pain, people begin to see it as a mirror that revealed important truths about themselves. For some, it exposes a fear of vulnerability. For others, it reveals patterns of emotional avoidance. For others still, it uncovers the need for validation, control, or reassurance. These realizations rarely appear overnight. They emerge slowly, like pieces of a puzzle coming together over time. And as this internal work continues, both individuals begin evolving in ways that were impossible during the relationship itself. Life often plays an important role in this transformation. New experiences challenge old beliefs. Unexpected obstacles force personal growth. Situations arise that teach lessons the relationship once tried to reveal. For example, someone who once struggled to communicate openly might find themselves in a situation where honest expression becomes necessary. Someone who once feared emotional intimacy might experience loneliness that encourages them to open their heart again. Someone who once depended heavily on a partner for emotional stability might learn how to develop inner strength and independence. These life experiences act like teachers. And although they may appear unrelated to the past relationship, they often shape the very qualities that the connection once required. It is as if life itself begins guiding both individuals toward becoming the people they needed to be all along. Consider the story of Adrian and Lila. When they first met, their connection was intense and exciting. They shared a deep curiosity about life and spent countless hours discussing their dreams and fears. But there was one problem neither of them fully understood at the time. Adrian carried a deep fear of failure that made him constantly focus on work and external success. Emotional vulnerability felt like a distraction from his goals. Lila, on the other hand, longed for emotional closeness and reassurance. She valued presence, communication, and shared experiences. As their relationship deepened, these differences slowly created tension. Lila began feeling neglected when Adrian prioritized his career. Adrian felt overwhelmed by emotional expectations he didn't know how to meet. Eventually, the relationship collapsed under the weight of these misunderstandings. After the separation, both believed they had simply chosen incompatible paths. Adrian moved to another city and immersed himself completely in his professional life. Lila focused on rebuilding her emotional confidence and exploring personal growth. Years passed. During that time, Adrian achieved many of the goals he had once believed would bring him happiness. Yet something unexpected happened along the way. He began realizing that success alone did not create fulfillment. Slowly, he started questioning the emotional walls he had built around himself. Lila, meanwhile, discovered something equally important. Through personal reflection and new life experiences, she realized that much of her emotional security had depended on external validation. She began learning how to create stability within herself rather than relying on others to provide it. Without knowing it, both were changing in ways that directly addressed the challenges that once existed in their relationship. The invisible work of transformation had begun. And this is one of the most fascinating aspects of separation in deep connections. While two people may be physically apart, their individual growth often moves in parallel directions. Both are learning lessons. Both are developing new emotional capacities. Both are evolving into different versions of themselves. Of course, none of this guarantees that two people will reunite. Life is complex, and every journey unfolds differently. But what makes these situations so intriguing is the way life sometimes begins rearranging circumstances once this inner transformation reaches a certain point. New opportunities appear that shift someone's location. Unexpected events bring people back into environments they once left behind. Mutual friends reconnect. Conversations reopen. Coincidences begin to occur. From the outside, these moments often look random. But when people look back at them later, they often describe the experience in a very different way. It feels as though life itself was quietly moving pieces into place, like a complex puzzle slowly assembling in the background. One small change leads to another. One decision opens a door to an unexpected meeting. One moment of courage leads to a conversation that once seemed impossible. And gradually, The distance that once separated two lives begins to shrink. But long before any reunion occurs, the universe often begins sending signals that something is shifting. Subtle reminders. Strange coincidences. Moments that feel too perfectly timed to be explained by chance alone. These signals often appear during the later stages of personal transformation, when both individuals have grown enough to recognize the deeper meaning of the connection they once shared. They may begin noticing repeated patterns appearing in everyday life. Numbers, songs, places, or memories that suddenly resurface. Dreams that feel vivid and emotionally significant. Encounters that seem strangely meaningful. For some, these moments feel like gentle whispers from the universe. A reminder that the story may not be finished yet. But how do these signs actually appear? And why do so many people report experiencing strange synchronicities during periods of emotional transformation? To understand this, we need to explore one of the most fascinating phenomena associated with spiritual connections. The mysterious world of synchronicities, the subtle signals that often appear when life is quietly guiding two paths back toward each other. Sign 1. Synchronicities start appearing everywhere. At first, it might seem like nothing more than coincidence. You glance at the clock and notice it says 11:11. Later that same day, a receipt shows $11.11. The next morning, you wake up suddenly in the middle of the night, and the clock again reads 2:22. Most people would dismiss these moments as random patterns that the mind happens to notice. After all, numbers appear everywhere in daily life. But then something else happens. A song begins playing in a cafe, and it's the exact song you once listened to with that person. You haven't heard it in years. Yet, suddenly it appears again, at the exact moment you were thinking about them. Later that week, someone mentions the city where the two of you first met. Then a movie scene reminds you of a conversation you once had together. At first, each moment seems small. But when they begin appearing repeatedly, they start to feel strangely meaningful. This is where many people begin experiencing something that spiritual traditions often describe as synchronicity. Synchronicity is a term originally introduced by the psychologist Carl Jung, who described it as a meaningful coincidence that cannot easily be explained by ordinary cause and effect. In simple terms, it refers to moments when external events seem to align with internal thoughts, emotions, or memories in a way that feels almost guided. These experiences often appear during periods of emotional transformation or personal awakening. And interestingly, many people report noticing synchronicities more frequently after a deep emotional connection has entered a phase of separation. Why does this happen? One explanation comes from the idea that when people undergo intense emotional experiences, their awareness becomes more sensitive to patterns and signals around them. When the mind is deeply engaged with a memory or connection, it begins noticing things that previously went unnoticed. But for many individuals, synchronicities feel like more than just psychological pattern recognition. They feel like gentle signals, subtle reminders that something meaningful is still unfolding beneath the surface of everyday life. Imagine someone walking through their daily routine months after a difficult separation. They may have tried to move forward, to rebuild their life, to focus on new goals. Yet every so often, something appears that brings the connection back into their awareness. A familiar song, a repeating number, a place that unexpectedly crosses their path again. Over time, these moments begin to form a pattern. And when patterns appear in life, the mind naturally begins asking questions. Why does this keep happening? Why do these reminders appear at moments when I'm thinking about them? Is this simply coincidence or something more? Whether one interprets synchronicities spiritually or psychologically, their impact on personal awareness can be powerful. They create moments of reflection. They invite people to pause and consider the deeper meaning of their experiences. And sometimes, they encourage individuals to revisit feelings they may have tried to suppress. Consider the story of Maya. 2 years after separating from someone she once believed was the love of her life, she had almost completely rebuilt her life. She had moved to a new city, started a new career, and slowly learned how to enjoy her independence again. For a long time, she believed the chapter of that relationship had completely closed. But then something unusual began happening. It started with small moments. One evening, she heard a song playing in a restaurant that she and her former partner used to listen to together during long drives. The memory surfaced unexpectedly, bringing back emotions she thought had already faded. A few days later, she noticed the same repeating number sequence, 1111, appearing in multiple places throughout the day. Then a mutual friend she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reached out, mentioning that they had recently seen her former partner. At first, Maya brushed off these experiences as random coincidences. But as the pattern continued, she began noticing something else. Each synchronicity appeared during moments when she was reflecting on the past connection, not with pain anymore, but with curiosity and acceptance. Instead of reopening old wounds, these moments created a sense of calm reflection. They reminded her not of what had been lost, but of how much she had grown since the separation. And that's one of the most fascinating aspects of synchronicities. They rarely appear during the most chaotic emotional periods. Instead, they often emerge after a phase of healing has begun. When the mind becomes quieter, awareness expands. People start noticing the subtle patterns that once passed by unnoticed. For some, these synchronicities feel like the universe gently tapping them on the shoulder. Not forcing anything, not demanding action. Simply reminding them that life story may still have chapters left to unfold. Repeating numbers are among the most commonly reported synchronicities. Sequences like 1111, 222, 333, and 444 often appear in clocks, receipts, phone numbers, or addresses. Many spiritual interpretations suggest that these numbers symbolize alignment, guidance, or awakening. For example, 1111 is often associated with moments of heightened awareness or spiritual alignment. Seeing it repeatedly can feel like a quiet signal that someone is becoming more conscious of the deeper patterns shaping their life. But synchronicities are not limited to numbers. They can appear through music, dreams, conversations, books, random encounters, or even sudden memories triggered by seemingly unrelated events. Imagine walking into a bookstore and randomly opening a page that contains a sentence directly related to something you've been questioning. Or meeting a stranger who unknowingly shares advice that perfectly addresses a challenge you've been facing. These moments often feel strangely personal, as if life itself is responding to inner thoughts and emotions. And when they appear repeatedly during periods of separation from a significant connection, they can feel especially meaningful. Because they often coincide with another subtle shift that many people experience during this stage. Instead of feeling consumed by longing or regret, individuals begin experiencing a sense of inner clarity. They begin understanding the relationship in a new way. They recognize how both people contributed to the challenges that once existed. They see how much personal growth has occurred since that time. In other words, the connection is no longer defined only by emotional intensity. It becomes part of a larger story of transformation. And interestingly, this shift in perspective often marks the moment when synchronicities become more frequent.
Why?
Because the mind is no longer trapped in emotional chaos. It has space to observe patterns. It has the calm awareness needed to recognize meaning where it once saw only confusion. This does not necessarily mean that reunion is guaranteed. Synchronicities are not instructions or promises. Instead, they function more like signals of alignment. They suggest that something within a person's life is beginning to shift. And sometimes, those shifts eventually lead to unexpected reconnections. Other times, they simply guide someone toward deeper self-understanding. But either way, they play an important role in the journey after separation. They remind people that life is rarely as random as it appears on the surface, and that sometimes the universe communicates through patterns rather than words. Yet synchronicities are only the first sign many people notice during this phase of transformation. Because after the patterns begin appearing externally, something even more surprising often begins happening internally. The emotional storm that once surrounded the connection suddenly begins to quiet. The longing softens. The pain fades, and in its place, something unexpected appears. A deep, steady sense of inner peace. But why would calmness appear after such a powerful emotional journey? And why do many people report feeling strangely balanced right before life takes another unexpected turn? That emotional shift may be one of the clearest signs that a deeper alignment is beginning to take place. And that is exactly what we will explore next. Sign 2. Sudden emotional shifts and inner calm. One of the most unexpected signs that something is changing beneath the surface of your life is not something you see around you. It's something you feel within you. After a long period of confusion, longing, or emotional turbulence, something shifts. Quietly, almost mysteriously. The intense emotions that once surrounded the connection begin to soften. The restless questions that once filled your mind begin to fade. The constant urge to understand, to analyze, or to chase answers slowly disappears. And in its place, something entirely different emerges. A sense of calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from forgetting someone, but the kind that comes from finally accepting the story exactly as it happened. This emotional shift often surprises people. For months, or even years, they may have carried a deep sense of unfinished business with someone who once meant everything to them. Thoughts of the connection could trigger sadness, regret, or endless speculation about what might have been. Then suddenly, one day, something changes. You wake up and realize the memory no longer hurts the same way. The thought of that person doesn't create a storm inside your mind. Instead, there is a quiet understanding. You begin seeing the connection not only through the lens of loss, but also through the lens of growth. And perhaps the most surprising part is this. You no longer feel the need to control the outcome. The desperate urge to reconnect disappears. The constant need for closure dissolves. And strangely enough, that emotional release often happens at the exact moment when something deeper in life begins aligning. Why does this shift occur? One explanation is that emotional healing has finally reached a turning point. When a powerful connection ends, the human mind naturally goes through a process of emotional processing. At first, there may be shock or denial. Then questions arise. Regret appears. Memories replay themselves repeatedly in an attempt to understand what went wrong. But as time passes, and as personal growth begins taking place, the emotional charge surrounding those memories slowly weakens. You begin seeing the situation more clearly. Instead of focusing only on what the other person did or didn't do, you begin recognizing your own patterns as well. Perhaps you realize that certain reactions came from old wounds you hadn't yet healed. Perhaps you notice that certain expectations placed pressure on the relationship. Perhaps you simply understand that both of you were at different stages of your emotional journey. This clarity brings something powerful with it.
Compassion.
Not only for the other person, but also for yourself. You begin forgiving the moments when you didn't know better. You begin releasing the belief that everything had to unfold perfectly. And slowly, the emotional grip of the past loosens. This is where inner calm begins to appear. But this calmness is not the same as indifference. You may still care about the person. You may still appreciate the connection you once shared. The difference is that your emotional stability no longer depends on whether the relationship returns or not. You feel whole again, and that feeling changes everything. Consider the story of Daniel. For nearly 2 years after his separation from someone he deeply loved, he struggled with constant questions. He wondered whether he had said the wrong things, whether he had acted too emotionally, whether the relationship could have survived if he had simply been more patient. These thoughts replayed themselves endlessly in his mind. Even as he tried to move forward with life, part of him remained stuck in the past. But over time, something began to shift. Daniel started focusing more on personal growth. He explored hobbies he had neglected, spent more time with friends, and began reflecting honestly on his own emotional patterns. He realized that much of his anxiety during the relationship came from a fear of abandonment he had carried since childhood. Understanding this didn't erase the past, but it helped him see the relationship from a broader perspective. Gradually, the emotional weight began to lift. One morning, while walking through a park near his home, he had a realization that surprised him. For the first time in years, he thought about that person without feeling pain. Instead, he felt gratitude. gratitude for the experiences they shared, gratitude for the lessons he had learned, and gratitude for the version of himself that had emerged from the growth that followed. In that moment, something inside him settled. He no longer needed answers. He no longer needed the story to continue in a specific way. He simply trusted that whatever was meant to unfold would do so naturally. Interestingly, many people report that this emotional turning point occurs right before unexpected events begin reshaping their path.
Why?
Because emotional attachment often creates tension. When someone desperately wants a particular outcome, their mind becomes focused on control. They analyze every possibility, anticipate every reaction, and attempt to influence the situation through effort. But when inner peace replaces emotional urgency, the dynamic changes. You stop forcing life to unfold in a specific direction. Instead, you become open to whatever possibilities may arise. And this openness often allows life to move more freely. Some spiritual perspectives describe this process as energetic alignment. When emotional resistance disappears, life flows more naturally. Opportunities appear that once felt impossible. Conversations happen without pressure. Encounters occur without expectations. In many cases, this is when the universe begins shifting circumstances in subtle ways. But even without spiritual explanations, there is a clear psychological reason why inner calm changes the course of relationships. When someone is emotionally stable, they behave differently. They communicate more clearly. They react less defensively. They create space for authentic connection instead of trying to force it. And if two people who once shared a powerful bond eventually reconnect under these conditions, the dynamic can feel completely different from before. Instead of emotional chaos, there is balance. Instead of fear, there is understanding. Instead of pressure, there is mutual respect. In other words, the connection becomes something new. But the emotional shift itself often arrives quietly. You might notice it in small ways. You stop checking your phone for messages that may never arrive. You stop replaying old conversations in your mind. You stop imagining scenarios where everything turns out differently. Instead, you focus on the present moment. You invest energy in your own life again. You begin discovering parts of yourself that had been overshadowed by the intensity of the past connection. And gradually, you become someone who feels complete on your own. Ironically, this is often the moment when life becomes most unpredictable. Because when you no longer feel attached to a specific outcome, you allow life to surprise you. You allow paths to unfold naturally. And sometimes, those paths lead you somewhere you never expected. But inner calm is only one sign that transformation is taking place. Because once emotional balance is restored, life often begins moving in new directions. Unexpected changes begin appearing, new opportunities, new locations, new people entering your life. At first, these events may seem unrelated to the past connection. But over time, they can begin shaping a path that slowly brings two lives back into the same orbit. How does this happen? And why do unexpected life changes often appear during the period when emotional healing has finally taken place? To understand this, we need to explore the next sign that many people experience on the journey after separation. The surprising ways in which life itself begins rearranging the pieces of your path. Sign 3. Unexpected life changes that redirect your path. Sometimes the universe does not speak through emotions or repeating numbers. Sometimes it speaks through change. Not small changes, but the kind that quietly alter the direction of your life. A new opportunity appears out of nowhere. A job offer comes from a city you never planned to visit. A chance meeting introduces you to someone who shifts your perspective. Plans you once thought were stable suddenly collapse, forcing you to reconsider everything. At first, these events can feel confusing. You might wonder why life suddenly seems to be moving in a completely different direction. You may feel as though the path you carefully built is being rearranged without your permission. But when people look back years later, many realize that these unexpected changes were not random disruptions. They were redirections. Moments when life quietly moved them into a place where something important was waiting. In the context of deep connections and separations, These life changes often play a surprising role, because when two people separate, their lives rarely remain static. Both individuals continue growing, evolving, and making choices that reshape their personal journeys. New careers emerge, friendships shift, locations change, priorities transform. And although these developments may seem unrelated to the past connection, they sometimes create pathways that eventually bring two lives back into alignment. Think of life as a complex network of roads. At certain moments, two people may start on the same path. They walk together for a while, sharing experiences, dreams, and challenges. But eventually something causes the road to split. One person turns left. The other turns right. At that moment, it feels as though the paths have permanently separated. Yet life rarely moves in straight lines. Roads curve. New intersections appear. Unexpected routes connect places that once seemed far apart. Years later, two paths that diverged long ago may cross again in ways neither person could have predicted. This is why many people who experience meaningful reunions often describe a series of unexpected life changes that led them back to each other. Changes that initially felt confusing or even frustrating, but later revealed themselves as essential steps in a larger story. Consider the story of Ethan and Laura. When they first met in their early 20s, they were both passionate, curious, and eager to explore the world. Their connection was intense from the beginning, but they were also at very different stages of life. Ethan had just started building his career and felt driven to prove himself professionally. Laura, meanwhile, dreamed of traveling and discovering different cultures before settling into a long-term routine. At first, they believed they could balance these differences. But over time, the tension between their priorities became impossible to ignore. Ethan felt pressure to stay focused on stability and long-term planning. Laura felt suffocated by the idea of committing to a life she hadn't fully explored yet. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to separate. Ethan remained in their hometown, continuing his career path. Laura left to travel across different countries, following the adventurous path she had always imagined. For several years, their lives moved in completely different directions. Ethan climbed steadily through the ranks of his profession. His days were filled with meetings, responsibilities, and long-term projects. Laura experienced a completely different reality. She explored new places, met people from different backgrounds, and discovered perspectives that reshaped her understanding of life. Neither of them expected their paths to cross again. But life has a curious way of creating intersections where we least expect them. 5 years later, Ethan received an unexpected job offer. The company he worked for decided to expand internationally and needed someone willing to relocate to help lead the new project. The city they chose? Barcelona. At first, Ethan hesitated. Moving to another country meant leaving behind everything familiar. His family, his friends, the routine he had spent years building. But something about the opportunity felt strangely right. So he accepted. What Ethan didn't know was that Laura had been living in Barcelona for nearly 2 years. She had originally planned to stay only a few months. But the city's creative atmosphere and vibrant culture had inspired her to remain longer than she expected. Their lives had been unfolding on opposite sides of the world. And yet, through a series of decisions neither of them could have predicted years earlier, their paths slowly curved back toward the same place. Stories like this appear again and again in real life. Not always with romantic reunions, but with surprising encounters that seem almost too perfectly timed to be accidental. Of course, this doesn't mean the universe is literally manipulating events like a cosmic chess player. But it does highlight an important truth about life. When people grow and evolve after a separation, they begin making different choices. They pursue opportunities they might once have avoided. They explore environments that align with their evolving identity. And sometimes, those new choices lead them toward places where meaningful reconnections become possible. Another fascinating aspect of these life changes is how they often appear after emotional healing has begun. When someone is still deeply attached to the past, they may hesitate to embrace new directions. They may stay in familiar environments because change feels overwhelming. But once inner calm develops, a new sense of openness appears. People become more willing to explore opportunities they once ignored. They become curious about life again. And that curiosity often leads them into situations that reshape their future in unexpected ways. For example, someone might accept a new job simply because it feels like a fresh start. Another person might decide to travel, move to a different city, or pursue a creative passion that had been neglected for years. Each of these decisions creates new experiences, new communities, new environments, and sometimes those environments bring old connections back into view. But the most interesting part of this process is that these changes rarely happen with the intention of reconnecting with the past. In fact, they often occur precisely because someone has released that expectation. They are no longer trying to recreate what once existed. They are simply following the path that feels authentic to who they are becoming. And that authenticity has a powerful effect. It aligns individuals with circumstances that match their true identity rather than their past fears or limitations. In other words, life begins responding to who they are now, not who they used to be. This shift can lead to situations that feel almost poetic in hindsight. A person moves to a city they never planned to visit and encounters someone from their past. Two individuals attend the same event without knowing the other will be there. A mutual friend reconnects them unexpectedly. An online message arrives after years of silence. These moments may seem random when they occur. But when viewed from the perspective of the entire journey, the growth, the healing, the changes, they often feel like natural outcomes of the paths both people have traveled. And whether these encounters lead to a renewed relationship or simply a moment of closure, they carry a deeper meaning. They reveal how life's unpredictable changes can sometimes bring clarity to connections that once ended in confusion. Yet, even before these life intersections occur, many people report experiencing something even more mysterious. Dreams. Intuitive feelings. Moments when the mind seems to receive messages that are difficult to explain logically. Some describe vivid dreams in which the other person appears again. Others experience sudden intuitive insights about the connection they once shared. These experiences can feel deeply personal and surprisingly powerful. But why do they occur? And why do they often appear during the same period when life itself begins shifting direction? To understand this phenomenon, we must explore another fascinating sign that often appears on the path after separation: the mysterious role of dreams, intuition, and inner messages that seem to guide people toward deeper understanding and sometimes toward unexpected reunions. Sign 4. Dreams, intuition, and spiritual messages. Sometimes the most powerful signals that something is shifting in your life do not appear in the physical world at all. They appear in the quietest places. In your dreams. In your intuition. In those strange moments when you suddenly feel something deep inside you that cannot be explained by logic. For many people who have experienced a profound emotional connection followed by separation, these inner signals begin appearing long after the relationship has ended. At first, they may seem insignificant. A dream where the person suddenly appears. A random feeling that reminds you of them for no obvious reason. A moment of intuition that whispers, "The story isn't finished yet." Most people dismiss these experiences quickly. After all, dreams are just dreams, right? And intuition can sometimes feel like imagination. But when these moments begin repeating themselves in ways that feel meaningful, they often invite a deeper question. Why does this person continue appearing in my inner world even after so much time has passed? Dreams are one of the most mysterious aspects of the human experience. Every night, while the conscious mind rests, the subconscious mind begins processing emotions, memories, and unresolved thoughts. Psychologists have long suggested that dreams often serve as a way for the mind to organize experiences that have not yet fully settled emotionally. When a connection has been especially intense, the emotional imprint it leaves behind can remain active within the subconscious for a long time. And during sleep, when the barriers of logic and daily distractions disappear, those emotions sometimes return in symbolic or vivid ways. Someone who has not thought about a person for months may suddenly dream about them again. The dream might feel incredibly real. Perhaps the two of you are talking calmly in the dream, sharing words that were never spoken in waking life. Perhaps you simply see them standing somewhere familiar, smiling quietly. And then you wake up with a strange feeling. Not sadness, not longing, but a quiet curiosity. Why did that dream feel so different? Why did it feel almost like a conversation rather than a memory? Experiences like this are incredibly common after meaningful relationships end. But what makes them interesting is not just their emotional intensity, it's the timing. Many people report that these dreams begin appearing during the later stages of emotional healing, when the pain of separation has already softened, when personal growth has already begun reshaping their identity. It is almost as if the subconscious mind is revisiting the connection from a new emotional perspective. Instead of replaying moments of conflict or loss, the dream may reflect understanding, forgiveness, or closure. And sometimes, the dream carries a sense of peace that was never fully experienced in reality. Consider the story of Amelia. 3 years after a difficult separation from someone she once believed she would spend her life with, she had finally reached a place of emotional balance. She had stopped searching for explanations and accepted that some relationships simply end without perfect closure. Her life had moved forward in many ways. She had new friendships, new routines, and a renewed sense of independence. Then one night, she had a dream that caught her completely off guard. In the dream, she was walking through a park she had never seen before. The air was calm, the trees were glowing with golden sunlight, and everything felt peaceful. As she walked down a quiet path, she suddenly saw the person she had once loved standing near a small bridge. They looked at each other, but instead of tension or sadness, there was calmness. No words were spoken. They simply smiled at each other for a moment. Then the dream faded. When Amelia woke up, she felt something unusual. Instead of emotional turmoil, she felt a deep sense of peace. It was as though the dream had quietly closed a chapter that had once felt unfinished. And strangely enough, only a few weeks later, she unexpectedly encountered that same person again in real life through a mutual friend. The meeting was calm, respectful, and surprisingly comfortable. Neither of them tried to force the past into the present. They simply acknowledged how much both of them had changed. For Amelia, the dream now felt almost like a gentle preparation, a moment when her subconscious mind had already reached acceptance before the real-world encounter happened. Of course, not every dream carries such clear emotional meaning. But when dreams repeatedly involve someone from a past connection, especially during times of personal transformation, they can serve as signals that the subconscious mind is still integrating the experience. Beyond dreams, many people also begin noticing something else during this phase. Intuition. Intuition is often described as a quiet inner knowing, not a logical conclusion, but a subtle feeling that something is true even before evidence appears. It might appear as a sudden thought that arrives out of nowhere, a feeling that someone is about to contact you, a strange certainty that life is moving towards something important. Some people report experiencing moments where they suddenly feel connected to someone they haven't spoken to in years. They think about them unexpectedly and later discover that the other person had been thinking about them as well. These moments are difficult to explain through traditional logic, yet they appear often enough in human experience that many cultures throughout history have taken intuition seriously. Some spiritual traditions suggest that deep emotional connections create energetic bonds that remain active even during periods of separation. Others interpret these experiences simply as the subconscious mind recognizing patterns and emotional memories more quickly than conscious thought. Regardless of the explanation, the result often feels the same. People experience moments where they sense something shifting before external events confirm it. Perhaps they suddenly feel that the emotional chapter they once struggled with has reached completion. Perhaps they sense that a conversation with someone from the past may happen sooner than expected. Or perhaps they simply feel a quiet confidence that life is unfolding in exactly the way it needs to. These intuitive moments rarely demand action. They are not commands or instructions. Instead, they feel more like gentle signals that encourage awareness. They remind individuals to stay present, to trust their personal growth, and to remain open to whatever possibilities life may bring. And interestingly, many people report that these intuitive signals appear during the same period when synchronicities and life changes begin aligning. It is almost as if different layers of experience, external events, emotional healing, and inner awareness are slowly moving toward the same point of transformation. But here is something important to remember. Intuition and dreams do not exist to create unrealistic expectations. They do not guarantee that every connection will return. Instead, they often help individuals understand the deeper meaning of what they have already experienced. They guide people toward emotional closure, self-understanding, and inner peace. And in some cases, they quietly prepare individuals for unexpected encounters that may happen later. Because when two people who once shared a powerful bond both grow, heal, and evolve, life sometimes offers them another moment of intersection. A moment when a story that once felt broken can be seen from an entirely new perspective. But what does that kind of reunion actually look like in real life? Is it always dramatic? Does it happen suddenly? Or does it often unfold in subtle, ordinary ways that only reveal their significance later? To understand this better, let's explore a real-life style example of how the universe can quietly guide two lives back together after years of growth, distance, and transformation. A real-life style example of a universe-orchestrated reunion. Stories about reunion often sound dramatic when people hear them for the first time. It's easy to imagine something cinematic, two people running toward each other in the rain, years of separation suddenly erased in one emotional moment. But real life rarely unfolds like a movie. In reality, reunions that happen after deep emotional separations are often much quieter, much more subtle. Sometimes they begin with a simple coincidence, so ordinary that neither person initially realizes the significance of the moment. Only later, when both individuals look back at the entire journey, do they begin to see the strange sequence of events that brought them back together. To understand how this can happen, let's explore a story that reflects patterns many people have experienced in real life. Imagine two people named Noah and Elena. When they first met in their late 20s, neither of them expected their lives to change. They met through mutual friends at a small gathering, nothing extraordinary, just an evening conversation that lasted longer than either of them anticipated. At first, it felt like an easy connection. They laughed at the same things. They shared similar interests. Conversations moved naturally from light topics to deeper reflections about life. But there was also something else in the air, something difficult to explain. A sense of familiarity, as if they had somehow met before. During the months that followed, their connection deepened quickly. They spent long evenings talking about dreams, fears, childhood memories, and the strange paths that had shaped their lives. For the first time in years, both of them felt truly understood. Yet beneath the beauty of the connection, something fragile existed. Noah had recently ended a long relationship that left him emotionally cautious. He cared deeply about Elena but feared repeating past mistakes. Elena, meanwhile, had spent years building independence after several difficult relationships. She valued emotional honesty, but she also guarded her heart carefully. At first, these differences seemed manageable. But as their connection grew stronger, so did the emotional intensity. Small misunderstandings began appearing. Moments of hesitation created distance. Conversations that once felt effortless became complicated by unspoken fears. Eventually, the tension reached a point where the relationship could no longer move forward. One evening, after a difficult conversation filled with confusion and frustration, they both realized something painful. They cared deeply about each other, but they weren't ready. The separation that followed was not dramatic. There was no betrayal, no angry confrontation, just a quiet recognition that the timing was wrong. So they went their separate ways. For Noah, the following years were focused on rebuilding his life. He immersed himself in work, accepted new opportunities, and slowly rediscovered parts of himself that had been lost during past relationships. During that time, he also began reflecting on his emotional patterns. He realized how much fear had influenced his decisions, how often he avoided vulnerability even when something meaningful appeared in his life. Through personal growth and honest self-reflection, he slowly learned how to open his heart without feeling overwhelmed by the possibility of loss. Elena's journey unfolded differently. After the separation, she chose to travel for a while. New cities, new experiences, and new perspectives helped her understand something important about herself. For years, she had believed that independence meant never relying on anyone emotionally. But through her experiences, she discovered that true strength wasn't about avoiding connection. It was about allowing closeness without losing herself in the process. Both of them were changing, but neither of them knew anything about the other's journey. Years passed. Life moved forward. Friends changed. Cities changed. Priorities evolved. The connection they once shared slowly became a memory, important but distant. Then one day, something unexpected happened. Noah received an invitation to attend a professional conference in another city. At first, he almost declined. His schedule was busy, and the event required traveling across the country. But something about the opportunity felt different. It felt like a chance to step outside his routine. So he accepted. When he arrived at the conference venue, hundreds of people were gathered in a large hall. Conversations filled the room. Strangers exchanged introductions and business cards. The environment felt busy and impersonal. Then, as Noah walked through the crowd looking for his assigned seat, he suddenly noticed a familiar voice. A voice he hadn't heard in years. He turned around, and there she was, Elena, standing only a few steps away. For a moment, both of them froze in quiet surprise. Neither had expected this.
Neither had planned it.
Yet somehow, after years of living completely separate lives, they had ended up in the same place at the same time. Their first conversation that day was cautious. Not awkward, but careful. Both of them had changed, and they could feel it. Instead of trying to recreate the past, they simply talked about the journeys they had taken since their separation. The lessons they had learned. The experiences that had reshaped their understanding of life. What surprised them most was how different the connection felt now. The intensity that once created pressure had softened into something calmer. More grounded. More mature. There was no urgency to define what this encounter meant. No expectation that everything had to return to the way it once was. Instead, they simply allowed the moment to exist. Over the following weeks, they stayed in contact.
Slowly.
Naturally. Without forcing anything. Conversations that once felt emotionally overwhelming now felt balanced. Both of them had grown into people who understood themselves far better than before. And, because of that, the connection had space to breathe. Months later, when they looked back on that unexpected meeting at the conference, both of them realized something fascinating. If even one small decision in their lives had been different, they would never have crossed paths again. If Noah had declined the invitation. If Elena had chosen a different project to attend. If either of them had arrived a few minutes later. Their paths would never have intersected. Yet somehow, through years of personal growth, life changes, and unexpected opportunities, the universe had quietly guided them back into the same moment. Not when they were the same people they once were, but when they had become people capable of understanding each other more deeply. Stories like this may sound extraordinary, but they are not as rare as people think. Because life has a curious way of creating intersections after periods of transformation. When two individuals grow independently, their journeys sometimes lead them back into the same environment again. Sometimes those moments lead to a renewed relationship. Sometimes they simply offer closure and understanding. But either way, they reveal something important. Separation does not always mean the end of a meaningful connection. Sometimes it simply marks the beginning of a longer journey, one that includes growth, healing, and unexpected reunions. Yet despite all of these possibilities, there is one mistake that often prevents people from experiencing the natural unfolding of these moments. A mistake that many people make during separation without even realizing it. A mistake that can block the very transformation that reunion requires. And understanding that mistake may be one of the most important lessons in the entire journey. After months, sometimes years of silence, growth, confusion, and spiritual awakening, many people assume the reunion will happen suddenly and effortlessly. They imagine a moment filled with music-like emotions. A message arrives. A call is made. Two people run into each other. Everything falls back into place. But the truth is far more mysterious. Before the universe allows a true reunion, it almost always introduces one final test. And this test can be subtle, painful, or completely unexpected. Because reunion is not just about love. It is about readiness. The universe does not bring two souls back together simply because they miss each other. It brings them back when they have become different people. So the question becomes, are you truly ready to meet them again, not as the person you were before, but as the person you have become? Or would you repeat the same patterns that caused the separation in the first place? This is where the final test begins. The test of emotional independence. The first and most common test is emotional independence. Earlier in the journey, the separation may have felt unbearable. You might have checked your phone constantly. You might have wondered, why did they leave? Do they still love me? Will they ever come back? Your emotional world revolved around them. But the universe cannot allow reunion if your happiness still depends entirely on another person. Because that is not love. That is attachment. So the final test often appears when you have finally started to let go. You are no longer obsessed with the outcome. You are no longer chasing signs every hour. You have built a life again. You laugh again. You wake up with peace instead of anxiety. And strangely, this is often the moment when the other person begins to reappear. Maybe they send a message. Maybe you unexpectedly see their name. Maybe a mutual friend mentions them. And suddenly the old emotions return. Your heart beats faster. Memories flood back. The question becomes, will you fall back into emotional dependency? Or will you remain centered in yourself? The universe watches this moment carefully. Because real reunion requires two complete individuals, not two of us trying to fill each other's emptiness. The test of boundaries. Another powerful test involves boundaries. In the past, the relationship may have been unbalanced. Perhaps one person gave too much, while the other took too much. Perhaps communication was unclear. Maybe one person tolerated behaviors that hurt them. Separation often forces both souls to recognize these patterns. So when reconnection begins, the universe sometimes recreates similar situations. Not to punish you, but to see whether you have truly learned. Imagine this scenario. After a long silence, they finally reach out. Your heart fills with hope. But their message is vague, or distant, or uncertain. The old version of you might have immediately rushed in. You might have tried to fix everything. You might have sacrificed your own needs just to keep them close. But the new version of you pauses. You breathe. You respond calmly. You communicate clearly. You no longer beg for love. You no longer chase validation. You simply show up as your authentic self. And this is the moment when something profound happens. Because the universe recognizes growth. When you maintain your boundaries with love instead of fear, you demonstrate that the separation truly transformed you. The test of timing. Sometimes the final test appears as patience. The signs of reunion become stronger. Synchronicities increase. Dreams become vivid. You feel their energy around you. It seems like everything is aligning. And yet the physical reunion still hasn't happened. This can be incredibly frustrating. You may ask yourself, if the universe wants us together, why is it taking so long? But timing is one of the universe's most precise tools. Just because two souls feel ready does not always mean the world around them is ready. There may still be lessons unfolding. There may be circumstances slowly shifting. Careers, families, personal growth, healing. Everything must align. Think of it like two trains traveling toward the same station. Even if both trains are moving in the right direction, they must arrive at the exact moment for the meeting to occur. So the final test asks, can you trust the process even when you cannot see the full picture? Can you remain calm when the outcome is still unfolding? Patience is not passive. It is active trust. The test of letting go completely. Perhaps the most surprising final test is this. The universe may ask you to let go completely. Not partially. Not temporarily.
Completely. This does not mean you stop loving them.
It means you release the idea that your happiness depends on reunion. You surrender control. You stop trying to force signs to mean something. You stop waiting. You stop chasing. You simply live your life fully. And strangely, this is often the exact moment when reunion becomes possible. Because when attachment disappears, love becomes pure. You are no longer trying to possess someone. You are simply open to connection. The universe values this state deeply. Because true reunion is not built on desperation. It is built on freedom. A story that reflects the final test. Consider the story of Maya and Daniel. After their separation, Maya spent months trying to understand what went wrong. She read books about soul connections. She searched for signs everywhere. She believed that if she could just decode the universe, she could bring Daniel back. But over time, something changed. She became tired of waiting. Not angry, just tired. So she made a decision. She stopped focusing on reunion. She focused on herself. She traveled. She learned new skills. She built friendships. For the first time in years, her happiness no longer depended on another person. One evening, while having dinner with friends, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. After 2 years of silence. But something inside her was different. Her hands didn't shake. Her heart didn't panic. She simply smiled. Because she realized something important. Whether he returned or not, she was already whole. And that realization changed everything. Their conversation began slowly. Not with drama. Not with desperation. But with honesty. And for the first time, their connection felt balanced. Because both of them had passed the final test. The moment before reunion. So if you feel like you are approaching reunion, ask yourself these questions honestly. Can you love them without losing yourself? Can you accept them as they are, not as you wish them to be? Can you maintain your peace even if the outcome is uncertain? Can you trust that what is meant for you cannot truly pass you by? If the answer to these questions is yes, something powerful may be happening in your life. Because the final test is not about proving yourself to another person. It is about proving to yourself that you have grown, that you have healed, that you have become stronger than the pain that once separated you. And when two souls reach this point, the universe no longer needs to keep them apart. A final reflection. Separation is never the end of the story. Sometimes it is the beginning of the transformation that makes true reunion possible. The universe does not separate souls out of cruelty. It separates them to teach them how to return differently, stronger, wiser, more awake. And when the final test is passed, reunion is no longer just a possibility. It becomes a natural outcome of two souls evolving in the same direction. If this message resonated with your journey, take a moment to reflect. Are you still waiting for reunion? Or are you becoming the person who is ready for it? Because the universe does not force love, but it does guide those who are willing to grow. And sometimes the separation you once feared is actually the path that leads you back to each other. If you felt something meaningful while listening to this message, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your experience in the comments. Your story might be the sign someone else needs to hear today. And remember, what is truly meant for your soul will never be lost. It may only be waiting for the moment when both hearts are finally ready. There is a moment in every profound spiritual journey when something shifts quietly. No thunder, no dramatic announcement from the sky. Just a deep, almost unexplainable feeling that something inside you has finally settled. The pain that once consumed you no longer controls your heart. The questions that once kept you awake at night no longer demand answers. And the person you once believed you could not live without is no longer someone you are chasing. Instead, they become someone you can simply love freely. This is often the moment when the universe begins preparing the final stage of reunion. But here is the truth that many people misunderstand. A sacred reunion does not mean returning to the same relationship you once had, because that relationship already ended. What returns is something completely different. Two people who once met as wounded souls, now meeting again as awakened individuals. When you realize the separation was never a punishment. At the beginning of the journey, separation often feels like rejection. You may have asked yourself painful questions. Why did this happen to us? Why would the universe bring someone so important into my life only to take them away? For a long time, it might have felt unfair. But spiritual growth has a strange way of changing our perspective. With time, you begin to see things differently. You start to notice that the separation forced you to confront parts of yourself that you had ignored for years. Maybe it forced you to heal old wounds. Maybe it pushed you to become emotionally stronger. Maybe it taught you how to love yourself in ways you never had before. And slowly, you begin to understand something important. The separation was not meant to break the connection. It was meant to transform it. Without that distance, the relationship may have remained trapped in old patterns. Miscommunication,
Dependency.
unhealed fears. But time apart allowed both souls to evolve. And evolution changes everything. The quiet signs that reunion is near. Long before the physical meeting happens, many people report subtle shifts. The emotional charge surrounding the other person softens. Instead of pain, there is peace. Instead of longing, there is acceptance. Instead of desperation, there is quiet trust. And then the synchronicities begin to appear again. Perhaps you hear their name unexpectedly. Perhaps you dream about them after months of silence. Perhaps a song you once shared begins appearing everywhere. These moments may feel like whispers from the universe. Not pushing you, not forcing anything. Just gently reminding you that certain connections are never truly lost. But the difference now is this. You no longer interpret these signs as something you must chase. You simply observe them. You allow them. And you continue living your life. Ironically, this relaxed state of awareness often allows the reunion to happen naturally. Because there is no longer resistance. The moment of reconnection. Sometimes reunion happens in a dramatic way. But often it happens quietly. A simple message, a chance encounter, a conversation that feels strangely familiar. You might expect a flood of overwhelming emotions, but many people describe something much calmer. It feels like coming home after a very long journey. There is warmth. There is recognition. But there is also a new sense of space between you.
Not distance.
Healthy space. The kind that allows two individuals to exist fully without losing themselves. You notice things about them that you once ignored. Their growth, their vulnerability, their honesty, and they notice the same changes in you. The person they once knew is no longer exactly the same. And strangely, that difference is what makes the connection stronger. Why the second meeting is always different. The first time two souls meet, they often bring their unhealed selves into the relationship. Old fears, old insecurities, old emotional habits. These patterns can create intense attraction, but they can also create conflict. That is why many powerful soul connections experience separation. Not because the connection was wrong, but because both people still needed to grow. When reunion finally happens, something remarkable becomes possible. Instead of reacting from wounds, both individuals can respond from awareness. Arguments become conversations. Fear becomes communication. Control becomes trust. And love becomes something deeper than emotion. It becomes a conscious choice. Every day, a story of true reunion. Consider the story of Elena and Marcus. When they first met in their early 20s, their connection felt electric. They understood each other instantly. They finished each other's sentences. They shared dreams about the future. But beneath that powerful connection were unspoken fears. Marcus struggled with emotional vulnerability. Elena feared abandonment. Their love was intense but unstable. After several painful conflicts, they separated. For years, they lived completely different lives. Marcus traveled the world and slowly learned to open his heart. Elena focused on personal healing and discovered her own independence. Neither of them expected to meet again. But life has a mysterious way of weaving paths together. 7 years later, They ran into each other at a small bookstore in another city. At first, there was silence, then laughter, then a long conversation over coffee. What surprised them both was how peaceful it felt. There was no rush, no pressure to recreate the past. They simply enjoyed the present moment. Over time, their connection rebuilt itself slowly. This time with patience, this time with understanding, because both of them had become different people. And that difference made the reunion possible. What the universe truly wants. Many people believe the universe forces reunion. But the truth is more subtle than that. The universe does not force love. It guides growth. When two souls grow in the same direction, their paths naturally begin to cross again. Not because they were chasing each other, but because they were both becoming the people they needed to be. This is why reunion often happens when you least expect it. Not when you are searching, not when you are trying to control the outcome, but when you are fully living your life. When your happiness no longer depends on someone else's presence. That is when love becomes free enough to return. The deeper meaning of the journey. When you look back at the entire journey, from the first meeting to the painful separation to the quiet possibility of reunion, you begin to see a larger picture. The purpose was never just about romance. It was about transformation. This connection taught you things that no ordinary relationship could teach. It showed you your deepest fears, but it also revealed your deepest capacity for love. And whether reunion happens in the way you imagined or not, the journey itself has already changed you forever. You are more aware, more compassionate, more connected to yourself. That is the real awakening. A final message for those still waiting. If you are still in the middle of this journey, remember something important. Your life is not on hold. Your happiness does not begin when someone returns. Your growth is the real purpose of this path. So continue building your life. Continue healing. Continue becoming the person you are meant to be. Because if reunion is part of your destiny, it will not require you to sacrifice your peace. It will arrive naturally, like two rivers finally meeting after traveling different landscapes. And when that moment comes, it will not feel forced. It will feel inevitable. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on your own journey. Have you experienced signs like these? Do you believe that separation can lead to deeper reunion? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story may inspire someone else who is walking a similar path. And if you enjoy exploring spiritual connections, personal transformation, and the deeper meaning behind life's mysterious journeys, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes the message you need most is the one you are about to hear next. And remember, the universe does not separate souls to punish them. Sometimes it separates them so that when they finally meet again, they are ready to truly love.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you.